4 years after Japan's surrender, an American general and a Japanese emperor stood facing each other in the imperial palace. These two men had been enemies during the most brutal war in human history. One had commanded the forces that killed hundreds of thousands of Japanese soldiers. The other had been worshipped as a living god whose name inspired millions to fight to the death. But now they were exchanging gifts, sharing meals, and writing letters to each other that would remain classified for decades. This is the story of one of the strangest friendships in military history, the secret correspondence between General Douglas MacArthur and Emperor Hirohito, and how their relationship shaped post-war Japan and revealed uncomfortable truths about justice, power, and reconciliation. In this video, you'll discover how MacArthur and Hirohito's relationship evolved from conqueror and conquered to something far more complex, what their declassified letters reveal about their private conversations, why MacArthur protected Hirohito from war crimes prosecution, and how this controversial friendship influenced Japan's transformation into a modern democracy. Using recently declassified documents, diplomatic cables, and historical analysis, we're exploring one of World War II's most complicated legacies. To understand the MacArthur-Hirohito relationship, we need to start with their first meeting on September 27, 1945, just weeks after Japan's surrender. This encounter was carefully orchestrated and enormously significant. Emperor Hirohito, who had never before met with a foreigner as an equal, traveled to the American embassy in Tokyo to meet General MacArthur, the supreme commander of Allied powers who now effectively ruled Japan. The photograph from that meeting became iconic. MacArthur, tall and casual in his khaki uniform without a tie, standing beside Hirohito, small and formal in a morning suit. The contrast was deliberate. It showed Japan and the world that the divine emperor was now subordinate to American authority. But what happened during that private meeting surprised everyone, including MacArthur. According to MacArthur's later accounts, Hirohito took full responsibility for the war. He told MacArthur that he came to offer himself to be judged by the powers you represent as the one to bear sole responsibility for every political and military decision made and action taken by my people in the conduct of the war. This statement, whether genuine remorse or calculated political strategy, deeply impressed MacArthur. From that moment, the general became determined to protect the emperor from war crimes prosecution. This decision was controversial then and remains so today. The Tokyo war crimes trials prosecuted Japanese military and political leaders for atrocities committed during the war. 28 top officials were indicted. 7 were executed, including General Tojo, the wartime prime minister. But Hirohito, who had been Japan's head of state throughout the war and in whose name countless atrocities were committed, was never charged. MacArthur argued that prosecuting the emperor would destabilize Japan, make occupation impossible, and potentially require 1 million American troops to maintain order. He believed Japan needed Hirohito to facilitate the transition to democracy. Critics argued this was a betrayal of justice. How could the emperor, who had approved military operations and knew about war crimes, escape accountability while his subordinates were hanged? Some historians suggest Hirohito was more involved in military decision-making than MacArthur acknowledged. Others argue he was a figurehead controlled by military leaders. The truth is probably somewhere in between, and MacArthur's decision to shield him ensured we'd never know the full extent of Hirohito's responsibility because a trial would have forced a thorough examination of the evidence. What we do know from declassified documents is that MacArthur and Hirohito developed a working relationship that evolved into something resembling mutual respect. They met regularly throughout the occupation, initially for formal discussions about governance and reconstruction, but increasingly for what both men characterized as friendly conversations. MacArthur later wrote that Hirohito was a man of deep sincerity and integrity. Hirohito, in turn, credited MacArthur with saving Japan from chaos and helping guide the nation toward democracy. Their correspondence, much of which remained classified until recent decades, reveals the complexity of their relationship. Early letters were formal and focused on administrative matters. MacArthur would request the emperor's assistance in implementing occupation policies. Hirohito would respond with assurances of cooperation. But as the occupation progressed, the tone changed. Letters became more personal. They discussed not just policy, but philosophy, history, and even family matters. MacArthur shared his thoughts on leadership and democracy. Hirohito discussed Japanese culture and his vision for his country's future. One remarkable exchange occurred in 1947 when Hirohito wrote to MacArthur expressing concern about communist influence in Japan. The emperor, stripped of his divine status and political power, was worried about Japan's direction. MacArthur's response was reassuring and almost paternal. He explained American intentions, emphasized that Japan's democratic development was progressing well, and encouraged Hirohito to have faith in the Japanese people's ability to govern themselves. This exchange reveals how their relationship had evolved. The conquered emperor was confiding worries to the conquering general, and the general was providing reassurance. MacArthur also used Hirohito strategically. He encouraged the emperor to tour Japan, meeting ordinary citizens and demonstrating that he was no longer an untouchable god, but a symbol of national unity and continuity. These tours were revolutionary. Japanese people who had never been allowed to look directly at the emperor now saw him walking among them, speaking with them, and displaying very human awkwardness. Hirohito's willingness to undergo this transformation, encouraged by MacArthur, helped legitimize the occupation and the dramatic changes being imposed on Japanese society. The personal connection between the two men showed in small gestures. When MacArthur's birthday approached, Hirohito sent gifts, initially formal items like silk or lacquerware, but later more personal selections based on MacArthur's known interests. MacArthur reciprocated, once giving Hirohito a specially bound collection of American historical documents. These weren't just diplomatic exchanges. They were gifts between two men who, despite their vastly different positions and the terrible war that had brought them together, had developed genuine regard for each other. But this friendship, if we can call it that, existed within a deeply unequal power structure. MacArthur ruled Japan with near absolute authority. Hirohito existed at his pleasure. While their letters might have used respectful language, the reality was that MacArthur could have removed Hirohito at any time. Some historians argue that what looked like friendship was actually a performance by Hirohito, a survival strategy by a man who understood he needed American protection to avoid prosecution and maintain his position. Others suggest MacArthur was equally calculating, using his relationship with Hirohito to control Japan more effectively than he could through direct military governance alone. The truth probably involves calculation from both men along with genuine human connection. They spent hours together over several years. They shared significant historical moments. They both seemed to believe they were working towards something important, the rebuilding of Japan as a peaceful, democratic nation. Whether friendship can truly exist between conqueror and conquered is debatable, but something developed between MacArthur and Hirohito that went beyond pure political necessity. One of the most revealing documents declassified in recent years is a letter Hirohito sent MacArthur in 1948, shortly before the general returned to the United States. In it, Hirohito thanked MacArthur not just officially but personally for his role in Japan's transformation. He wrote about his gratitude for MacArthur's wisdom, his fairness, and his apparent genuine concern for Japan's welfare. The letter's tone suggests real emotion, though historians debate how much was diplomatic courtesy versus authentic feeling. MacArthur's response was equally personal. He wrote about his admiration for how Hirohito had handled the enormous challenges of defeat and transformation. He praised the emperor's dedication to his people and his willingness to embrace democracy despite it costing him his divine status. MacArthur also expressed hope that history would judge both men kindly for their efforts to turn enemies into peaceful partners. Reading these letters decades later, it's striking how both men seemed aware they were participating in something historically significant and how both seemed to want the other's approval. The relationship took on new dimensions during the Korean War. MacArthur was recalled to active command, leading United Nations forces against North Korea and China. Japan became a crucial rear area for the war effort, and MacArthur relied on Japanese cooperation to support military operations. Hirohito, no longer officially involved in governance under Japan's new constitution, nonetheless worked behind the scenes to ensure Japan supported the American war effort. Their correspondence during this period shows Hirohito expressing concern for MacArthur's safety and MacArthur reassuring the emperor about Japan's security. When President Truman fired MacArthur in 1951 during the Korean War controversy over expanding the conflict into China, Hirohito reportedly sent a private letter expressing regret and gratitude for MacArthur's service. This letter, if it exists, has never been publicly released, but multiple sources reference its existence. MacArthur's departure from the Pacific marked the end of his direct relationship with Hirohito, though the two men reportedly maintained occasional correspondence until MacArthur's death in 1964. The legacy of the MacArthur-Hirohito relationship is complicated and controversial. On one hand, it facilitated Japan's relatively peaceful transition from militaristic empire to democratic nation. The occupation succeeded far better than anyone expected, and the personal relationship between MacArthur and Hirohito helped make that possible.
Japan avoided the chaos and extended guerrilla resistance that might have occurred if the emperor had been prosecuted or removed. Instead, Japan rebuilt rapidly and became one of America's closest allies. On the other hand, this came at the cost of accountability. Hirohito never faced trial. Many Japanese war criminals escaped prosecution because they had information about the emperor that MacArthur wanted suppressed. Victims of Japanese aggression throughout Asia never received the full accounting they deserved because MacArthur prioritized stability over justice. The decision to protect Hirohito sent a message that powerful people can escape consequences if it's politically convenient. The declassified correspondence also reveals how history gets shaped by personal relationships. MacArthur's friendship with Hirohito influenced how the occupation was conducted, which Japanese leaders were protected or prosecuted, and how the war's history was recorded. In his memoirs, MacArthur portrayed Hirohito sympathetically, shaping American perceptions for decades. Hirohito, in turn, worked to present the war as something that happened despite his wishes rather than with his approval, a narrative MacArthur supported. Modern historians have access to more documents than ever before, and they're re-examining the MacArthur-Hirohito relationship with fresh eyes. Some see it as a pragmatic partnership that achieved important goals. Others view it as a morally compromised arrangement that sacrificed justice for expediency. Most acknowledge it was probably both. History rarely offers clean moral choices, and the MacArthur-Hirohito relationship exemplifies this complexity. What's undeniable is that these two men, who should have been bitter enemies, developed a relationship that changed the course of post-war Asia. Their correspondence shows two intelligent, complicated men navigating an unprecedented situation. They weren't friends in the normal sense. They couldn't be given the circumstances, but they were partners in an extraordinary historical moment, and their letters reveal that both men understood this. The story of MacArthur and Hirohito challenges simple narratives about World War II. We want clear heroes and villains, justice and accountability. But the real story involves difficult compromises, relationships that shouldn't have worked but did, and decisions that were simultaneously wise and unjust. The declassified letters between these two men show us that history is made by humans with mixed motives, complicated feelings, and impossible choices. Today, the MacArthur-Hirohito correspondence serves as a reminder that even the most unlikely relationships can shape history. It shows us that reconciliation, however imperfect, is possible even after terrible conflict. And it forces us to grapple with uncomfortable questions about justice, power, and the price of peace. The friendship medals these two men exchanged symbolized more than personal regard. They represented a choice to move forward rather than dwell on the past, for better and for worse. That choice defined post-war Japan and continues to influence East Asian politics today. The letters they wrote, now finally available for historians to study, give us insight into one of history's most consequential and controversial relationships.